Hi guys, my name is Carly. Welcome back to my channel. Today is Thursday, it's raining, and it is a perfect time to talk about tornadoes. This week I had started preparing to do the tri-state tornado video just because it's been in so much discourse lately with the other Kentucky quad-state tornado. But because there's no footage of the tri-state tornado that I normally use in my regular videos, so bear with me, I should have it out by next week. And so in the meantime, we're going to talk about a different outbreak today. Today we're going to be talking about a tornado outbreak in Wichita Falls, and Wichita Falls is apparently pretty tornado prone. As you can imagine, it's in the Red River Valley, it's in the center of the plains. So they've had multiple violent tornadoes go through their area, but today we're going to be focusing on the 1979 outbreak, known to some as the Red River Valley outbreak, and to the locals as Terrible Tuesday.
Anyone in the sound of my voice, there is a tornado on the ground near the Psych Center area in Wichita Falls. Please take cover.
1979 in Texas is like any other time in America, full of bell-bottom jeans, technological innovation, economic struggle, and disco. In northern Texas, on the border of Oklahoma, lies a city called Wichita Falls. The late 70s in Wichita Falls was pretty simple. An average salary was about $12,000. A house could be bought for under $50,000. A McDonald's burger was 40 cents. And the average price per gallon for gas had just skyrocketed up to a staggering 80 cents. By April of 1979, spring is in full swing in Texas. Daily temperatures averaged around the mid to high 70s. Kids were just about to get out of school, and people could really just start to enjoy being outside. And although the temperatures are rising in April, April is not peak tornado season for Tornado Alley. That's generally reserved for May to June. But this spring would prove to be a little different. So, of course, now we're going to talk a little bit about the meteorological setup. In the days leading to what we know now would be the Red River Valley tornado outbreak, trouble had already started to brew. A strong low-pressure system had started to move through Colorado, deepening as it dug through the state. With the low-pressure system, a warm front had begun to pull warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico into the plains. Additionally, in the upper atmosphere, we have a nose of an extremely strong jet stream that was set to turn northeastward to pass directly through Texas and Oklahoma. So now that we have the moisture and instability from the warm front and the strong winds aloft, we now have the ingredients for a classic Tornado Alley outbreak. And the Red River Valley is right in the bullseye.
And so the cold air coming in aloft, you just can't have all that warm air and moisture in the lower levels of the cold air aloft without something rising and causing trouble.
Now, for severe weather to occur, a number of ingredients have to come together. First, moisture. Moisture is the fuel that thunderstorms use. 2, warm air. Warm air rises, and it's that rising motion that forms the thunderstorms. And 3, lift. Some kind of a forcing mechanism. Often a cold front sparks the thunderstorms. And 4, for the really severe weather, you need rotating winds. That's how the supercell thunderstorms form, the thunderstorms capable of producing the most deadly tornadoes.
On the morning of April 10th, all the ingredients had really come together for a pretty significant tornado outbreak, and all that was left to do was wait.
Early on the morning of April 10th, 1979, it was clear to forecasters that the ingredients were in place for weather disaster.
By the early morning hours of April 10th, the strong surface low is over Colorado, with winds screaming into the plains, and temperatures are already rising to the 60s. National Severe Storms Forecast Center issues a tornado watch number 67 at 2:30 p.m. for southern Oklahoma and northern and central Texas counties. The atmosphere is rapidly destabilizing, and the storms were about to begin.
Moist, warm air from the south overruns cold air from the north. The warm air is forced aloft, and a thunderstorm forms.
Tuesday afternoon, things took a turn for the worse.
Just after 3 p.m., the first supercell of the day forms south of Fravel, Texas. Ahead of these prime atmospheric conditions, the storm quickly began to rotate, and by 3:30 p.m., the ominous low-hanging cloud had reached parts of Vernon, Texas.
Rain begins falling beneath the northeastern part of the storm, and then large hail, a tip-off of something far worse. At the southwest edge of the storm, almost always at that place, a dark, low-hanging cloud begins to churn. A few minutes later, the horror begins.
As this rotating column approaches the town, the Vernon police report a tornado spotted on the ground. A tornado warning is immediately issued, and the first tornado sirens of the day sound for Vernon, Texas. As the growing column approached the town, it would clip the southern edge of the city. Unfortunately, this first tornado would kind of set the precedent for the rest of the day. 11 people would be killed with another 600 injuries, and the tornado damaged over 100 homes.
Billy Smith and I were headed back to Wichita Falls from Vernon, and we had taken the first videotape of that disaster, trying to get back in time to get some of it on the 6 o'clock news.
Some of the deaths that occurred here were people in cars, and this would be a really disturbing trend throughout the rest of the day of people who were in cars when the tornado struck. And I think what's interesting here about this first tornado is that it's possible since it was the first tornado of the day, that these people didn't take it as seriously, or maybe they were just a little caught off guard that this was the first tornado of the day. Maybe these people were even trying to get home. I don't know. But in either case, for the short distance that this tornado traveled and the fact that it just barely crossed the city, 11 deaths is pretty high. This first tornado would give a preview of what was to come for the rest of the day, and unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last tornado seen from this supercell. One of the reasons this particular outbreak is so interesting is because that the entire outbreak was caused by 3 supercells only. So each of these supercells would spawn multiple tornadoes back to back. It would drop a tornado and then recycle before dropping another one. So each of the tornadoes that we talk about today are going to be from one of these 3 main supercells. On the map, you can see where a tornado would drop and then recycle, kind of skipping through. And as you can probably gather, this is not going to be the last time we see the Vernon supercell. Just after the first fatal twister in Vernon, a new supercell, the second of the 3 that we're going to talk about today, developed at 3:50 p.m. south of Vernon near Harold, Texas. Just after forming, this second supercell very quickly began to drop a tornado with prime atmospheric conditions out ahead of it, and members of the Amateur Radio Club reported the twister to the National Weather Service soon after.
Other spotters were deployed around the city when the tornado watch was issued by the Severe Storms Forecast Center in early afternoon. Other spotters were stationed at the local weather office. All were linked by amateur radio.
The twister easily plows through the small town of Harold, Texas without stopping before quickly moving on to its next city, Granville. And now the outbreak is officially underway as these 2 powerful first and second supercells are dropping tornadoes across the Red River Valley, taking lives, wreaking havoc, and the worst was still yet to be seen. Damage reports quickly began coming out of Harold, Texas, and the tornado would continue its track into the city of Granville.
soon, the tale of disaster began to unfold as police and fire department units gave their account of the monster tornado.
This tornado was particularly longer track compared to the other ones. It would hit the cities of Harold and Granfield and a lot of farmland in between, and amazingly would only cause one fatality here. And this was really considered a success compared to the earlier Vernon, Texas tornado that only one person was killed. One fatality occurred as a woman tried to shelter underneath a semi-truck, which we know is not a good place to be. But I can't imagine that she really probably had anywhere else to go. And I don't know, being in the face of a tornado like that, I'm not sure anyone else would really know what to do either. This middle supercell would be the longest track supercell of the day and arguably the most impressive. It just didn't strike larger cities like Wichita Falls and Vernon, fortunately. Just after the Granfield tornadoes lift, our first supercell is producing again. At 4 p.m., this first supercell that initially dropped a tornado in Vernon began to recycle, and this time it wasn't just going to clip a city. The newly formed tornado from this powerful supercell had crossed the Texas-Oklahoma border and was now on its way into the city of Lawton, Oklahoma. At this point in the outbreak, city officials and citizens have already seen the destruction that occurred in Vernon, in Harold, and in Granfield, and they are a lot more prepared this time. As the storm approaches the city, spotters were ahead of the storm to report to the media, and the tornado sirens were officially sounding by 4:15 p.m. Fortunately, this time there was also ample television coverage of the storm as it tracked through the city, unlike Vernon, unfortunately. Right before 5 p.m., the city of Lawton took a direct hit by this powerful storm.
Trained to track these types of storms.
Mona Partham and her husband were caught in the open by the tornado and survived. They abandoned their car near a church and tried to cling to a tree.
I remember spinning around the tree, and the next thing I know, we were sitting up on the curb. A gentleman at a pickup passed us, and I happened to raise my hand up, took us to the hospital, where they amputated my right leg below the knee. A couple of weeks later, I was flown to a Dallas hospital, where they amputated my left leg above the knee.
Unfortunately, 3 people would lose their lives and another 100 people would be injured. But again, the deaths here were really mitigated just because of the amount of coverage that went into the storm and the spotters helping to keep meteorologists up to date with exactly where the storm was. Up until this point, the damage from the first and second supercells had been occurring fairly far northeast of Wichita Falls, and that was about to change. The third and southernmost supercell first produced near Seymour, Texas. This storm would immediately start causing damage on its path, continuing northeast before recycling, and would eventually reproduce again near Holiday, Texas.
Anyone in the sound of my voice, there is a tornado on the ground.
After producing damage in Seymour, Texas and Holiday, Texas, the twister is now well on its way northeast, which was directly in the path to Wichita Falls. Fortunately, at this point, emergency services, meteorologists, and storm spotters are well aware of the danger, and by 5:25, the tornado sirens for Wichita Falls are already going off.
Anyone in the sound of my voice, there is a tornado on the ground near the Psych Center area in Wichita Falls. Please take cover.
Additionally, there were a lot of sightings from storm spotters and just locals who were reporting things to media to really help keep meteorologists and other broadcasters aware of exactly where this tornado was in real time.
This is WB5SXX out of the state.
The man who first spotted the Tuesday tornado was Glenn Watley. Watley was assigned to the stadium. Other spotters were deployed around the city when the tornado watch was issued by the Severe Storms Forecast Center in early afternoon.
Fort Worth and Jacksboro Highway, we got the same situation out here. Okay, the thing is over the expressway. It's over the 281 expressway right now. It's still moving back.
Tornado sightings continued to be reported by spotters from 5:30 into 6 o'clock as the twister moved directly towards Wichita Falls. At this point, witnesses start to report that the tornado had smaller rope-like vortices dancing around the parent tornado, and it's also increasing in size and strength.
Wall cloud reaches toward the ground. Witnesses report seeing as many as 3 separate vortices rotating around each other. Multiple vortex tornadoes produce nature's most violent winds, and this one became a spiraling monster that took direct aim at Wichita Falls.
Sirens are continuing to sound, trying to prepare the people to get ready for the storm to come. As we're starting to see, this is actually a really advanced warning for Wichita Falls. The tornado sirens have been going off for about 20 minutes now, and while you would think that this is a really good thing, and it is, it can actually prove to be a little bit dangerous as well, as we're going to see. At 6 o'clock sharp, a storm spotter reports a funnel 5 miles southwest of Wichita Falls Memorial Stadium on Southwest Parkway. The tornado is officially in Wichita Falls.
Coming into the town, heading towards the Kell Freeway. I'm a little bit out in front of it, but I'm far enough away where I think I can zip out if I have to.
I got up to speeds of 70 to 75 miles an hour in my station wagon, and as I crested the hill, I realized that the tornado was still immediately behind me, and I was not gaining any distance at all.
I'll tell you what, they've got a bad one up there. It appears to be coming into the town, heading towards the Kell Freeway. I'm a little bit out in front of it, but I'm far enough away where I think I can zip out if I have to.
6:04, shit is really starting to hit the fan. The tornado is now an abhorrent, black, shapeless mass and is sitting behind the Memorial Stadium, which is fairly new at that time and still considered to be like the treasure of the city. As it continues to tear through the city, the tornado would now reach the McNeil Junior High School and completely destroy it.
Okay, that thing looks like it's moving directly east. It's on the north side, still on the ground. Somebody go ahead. What direction and where's the location, please? Cypress and 369.
Now it's a massive wedge tornado, so wide that the people who are directly in its path wouldn't probably know that it was a tornado outside of the horrible freight train sound and ground shaking in front of them.
The tornado is so wide, some residents don't realize what they're looking at, like this photographer who was blown into his garage. Only luck saved his life.
At this point, the tornado is reaching nearly a mile wide in diameter. It's tossing cars off the freeway, crushing them on Southwest Parkway, destroying the fire station and banks on that road.
Okay, that thing looks like it's moving directly east. It's on the north side, still on the ground. Cody, go ahead. 69, it is heading along Southwest Parkway. Is that Roger? That's Roger. How wide is it? 75, let's say about 10 city blocks wide. That's a big one, Vic.
This was the bank. They had sounded the tornado sirens that afternoon, but we really didn't pay any attention to them. So 7 of us employees went into the vault, and we could hear this roaring sound. And then all of a sudden, we just felt like we was going to explode, and our ears needed popping. And then we got up, and we looked out, and we just couldn't believe what we saw, because there the cars that were in the parking lot were now in the bank's lobby, and there was no bank left.
The tornado's next target is the Faith Village neighborhood, and it destroyed almost every single home in this neighborhood.
Faith Village is absolutely flattened. There are no houses standing within my view as I drive down Kemp Boulevard. I am now approaching at Call Field and Midwestern Parkway. It is flattened. I'll be back with more reports as I have the details for you. This is James Bond in the 1st United Newsliner Unit number 41298.
Fortunately, due to the pretty extensive warning time that we talked about, most of the people did take cover and nobody died in this neighborhood, which was a really good thing. This wouldn't be the case, however, for the next target, the Sykes Center Mall.
Sykes Center Mall is severely damaged. As I look to the right in the distance, the Midwestern Lincoln Coliseum has part of the roof missing. There are cars turned upside down, smashed flat. They're laying out in the fields. Undoubtedly, there must be some people in these vehicles that have not been out.
Were you in the mall when this happened?
Yes, I was. I worked for Gordon's Jewelers, and I was just fixing to go home. And I walked outside and the sirens was going, so I got back in the store and I got under the desk. And then when it was all over, we came out and we're all 3 trying to stick by each other.
3 people would be killed in a restaurant in the mall, and another several would be killed in the parking lot, which is really sad because these people were actually trying to run out to their cars, perhaps to maybe get home, and they didn't make it. So that, you know, is horrible.
In the sound of my voice, there is a tornado on the ground near the Sykes Center area in Wichita Falls. Please take cover.
The tornado reaches a diameter of over 1 mile wide as it barrels down one of the busiest streets in the city.
75, let's say about 10 city blocks wide.
The tornado is now reaching its peak intensity and peak width at 1.5 miles wide, going through this major city. The tornado is now heading for Highway 287, and not only did it hit homes and businesses on the highway, it went over this main road on the busiest time of the day when people were trying to get home from work, go get their kids, and just generally try to make it home.
Norma Wright walked outside her gift shop just as the tornado struck. She grabbed a construction scaffold and hung on.
Suddenly the wind was not a wind anymore. It was a very solid force. I heard the sound of my voice as the air was pulled from my lungs. The sensations were of being pounded and hit and stabbed. All 4 limbs were severely injured. My left leg was off just below the knee. My right arm was torn from elbow to wrist. My left arm was broken, and my right leg was both broken in several places and lacerated to the bone.
And it only got worse. A lot of the people that were out on the highway at this time were actually people who were previously at home, and because they got such an extended tornado warning, they actually went out trying to outrun the storm and were caught on the highway during rush hour traffic. The tornado didn't care, and it blasted over the highway, smashing and throwing a lot of the cars and contributing to a lot of the death toll on this day. Some of these people had even tried to seek shelter on the highway, which we know now, hiding under an overpass is absolutely the worst place to be during a tornado. It creates a sort of wind tunnel effect, and those people were sucked out, and they did not make it.
And when the winds finally subsided, all the cars that had pulled in and parked under the overpass had been blown and were stacked up on one another. And I started looking for my automobile, and I found it a quarter of a mile down the expressway in this condition.
The final tornado lifted just after 6:30. People who were buried in the rubble start to crawl out of their homes and begin to try to dig their way out if they were lucky enough to survive. People were screaming for help, calling out for loved ones, and just trying to process that their lives had been completely uprooted.
As we drove down Southwest Parkway, the heavy clouds seemed to accentuate the gloom that was to encompass the city. Nelson Duffel and Bob O'Hearn of our staff were coming into the city from the Central Freeway, and within minutes they were in the Western Hills University Park area of the city.
Someone is out in their front yard at this time checking through the damage. It appears to be devastating. The tornado apparently has covered a large portion of at least the southern part of Wichita Falls and probably even more.
The city was a total war zone. Alongside demolished homes that looked like a bomb had gone off, emergency services combed the streets for bodies, police patrolled to ensure crimes were kept at bay, and helicopters kept a constant hover over the newly devastated city.
In the field, emergency command posts were set up as police and fire units and volunteers began the search for the dead and injured.
Well, right now we're searching house to house with two men on either side of the street to check for injured people, and it's going to take a bigger part of the night this time.
While that operation continued, the Emergency Operations Center was established at the police department. Assistant City Manager Bob Haley arrived within a short time after climbing out of his flattened home.
Just kind of keep our noise level down. We'll talk to you in a second, Jerry, ask for your help there, and we want to start looking long range for tomorrow morning.
At the hospitals, injured were brought in by ambulances, police units, private cars, and even hearses, which were pressed into service because of the magnitude of the disaster. Both Wichita General and Bethania hospitals were filled to overflowing. Many injured were also taken to the Shepherd Air Force Base Regional Hospital for treatment of a variety of injuries. All during the night, the search continued. The city huddled in darkness without any power. Then at daylight, the real impact of the devastation became apparent.
The morning sun over Wichita Falls was beautiful the next day, but it did not shed its light on beauty like the morning before. This time, it was destruction.
On April 11th, the morning after, reports claimed that more than 40 people were killed, with dozens still missing or feared dead.
46 are dead. 1,700 are injured. 5,000 homes have been demolished, and many of the 25,000 who occupied them are homeless.
FEMA and Red Cross did come to offer their services, of course, and while the death toll wouldn't be fully resolved for another few weeks, what was fully understood was that tens of thousands of people had lost their homes, and the city was now facing a real crisis to house these victims.
Wichita Falls quickly exhausts its own and the state's resources, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency steps in. 1,400 trailers are brought in to provide temporary housing. The city has to stencil street names on curbs. With familiar landmarks gone, many residents can't find their neighborhoods.
Fortunately, FEMA was able to bring in lines of government trailer homes to try to help some of these people out. And the local government did come through and promise to rebuild the city and to give the people some kind of hope. And they did. And again, in Wichita Falls alone, 20,000 people were homeless, which already sounds like a lot, but if you compare it to the total population, that is 20% of Wichita Falls population that was now without a home. Surveying conducted after the tornadoes consisted of extensive engineering analysis and storm intensity estimates, which would be in part done by Dr. Ted Fujita, which was really an honor because, I mean, he literally invented the Fujita scale, so to have him be able to work on one of these events was really neat. And he also did the mapping for the tornadoes that we've looked at for how these three supercells skipped along as they recycled and dropped tornadoes, so it's really neat. The damage done in Wichita Falls was undeniably catastrophic, but it would actually only end up garnering an F4 rating. The Wichita Falls tornado ended up being over 1.5 miles wide and trailing through the city for about 8 miles, which is absolutely incredible. And although it got an F4 rather than an F5 rating, Dr. Ted Fujita himself did comment on the storm and said that this was personally the widest storm path he had ever seen, and he said it was, quote, almost equal to that of the giant storm that leveled Xenia, Ohio, which, if you know, it was a really devastating F5 tornado. The damage total ended up being in excess of $400 million at the time, which was a record that wouldn't end up being broken until 20 years later in 1999. The Lawton, Oklahoma tornado, which was from the first supercell in Vernon, Texas, ended up being an F3. There were 3 deaths. Vernon, Texas, it ended up being an F4. 11 people were killed, some of those being in cars on the highway, as we discussed. In the Red River Valley, there was a total of 56 fatalities and just over 1,700 injuries. 42 people were killed in Wichita Falls alone. And what's really sad about that is that 25 of those 42 deaths in Wichita Falls were people who were in their cars. And to add to that, 16 of those 25 people in their cars who were killed were leaving their home to try to outrun the tornado, and in every single case their homes weren't hit by the tornado at all. So they essentially left the safety of their home, got in their car, and ended up getting themselves stuck in traffic and killed. So it was really tragic because despite the fact that this tornado specifically in Wichita was so well warned, it almost had a negative effect because while most of the people did shelter at home, the excess warning time gave people the idea that they could leave out ahead of the event and make it safe, which was not the case. Don Burgess of the National Severe Storm Laboratory reported that in addition to the 42 deaths from the actual tornado itself, another 3 people actually had heart attacks from the event and ended up passing away shortly after.
46 people died in Wichita Falls that Tuesday. It was a very small number considering the path, 1.5 miles wide, that the tornado cut through the town.
Many researchers came into our city following the disaster, and without exception, each one of those researchers concluded that we should have had perhaps as many as 2,000 fatalities.
I'm editing, but I wanted to say that I feel like I didn't really explain to the best of my ability. I wanted to say that despite the fact that this tornado outbreak killed over 50 people, the deaths were really mitigated in my opinion, considering that the Wichita Falls tornado went right through a major city. The people were incredibly prepared. All of the neighborhoods that were kind of torn up, all of the people were sheltering, and in most every single case, these people made it out okay. So I personally think that this situation could have been a lot worse, like in the hundreds of deaths. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Cheers.
Rebuilding begins immediately. With it comes an awakening sense of humor.
Wichita Falls and the Red River Valley built back stronger than ever. With the help of local and federal aid, friends, and complete strangers, people were able to slowly get back to their normal lives. Of course, there were people who chose not to rebuild, understandably so, and those scars can still be seen as empty concrete slabs to this day. No matter how broken they might have been, the people of the Red River Valley in Wichita Falls built both their town and their hopes back from the ground up. So what are the takeaways from this event? I like to talk about either what we can learn from an event or how it sort of was a catalyst for change in the weather community. And I think that this April 10th Red River Valley outbreak really was a catalyst for positive change in the community. It was beneficial for meteorologists and social scientists to help understand the human reaction to tornadoes, whether it be the warnings, the tornado watches, or seeing live footage and how the people would sort of react to it. Alongside of better understanding the social science, I think that it almost served as a sort of cautionary tale for other people as to truly why you cannot get in your car and flee a storm. And if there ever was an exception, this was not the event. Soon after, the outbreak would be deemed as Terrible Tuesday by the locals and would become sort of the outbreak that Wichita Falls is known for. There have been other violent F4, F5 tornadoes that have occurred there, but this one sort of takes a special place cemented in the history of Tornado Alley. Yeah, so that is the 1979 Wichita Falls outbreak, Red River Valley outbreak, Terrible Tuesday, whatever you want to call it. I've really enjoyed researching this one. And I also really enjoy watching the retro meteorology videos, all of the coverage, even like the Weather Channel back a couple decades, I think is really fun to watch back when it used to be kind of good. But yeah, I would love to know what you guys thought about this one. If you have any stories, personal anecdotes, or if you have an outbreak or specific tornado you want me to talk about in the future, leave that in the comments. I would be more than happy to research it. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will see you very soon. Bye.